You're about to hear the story of one of history's most calculated acts of psychological warfare. For 76 days, Marie Antoinette was not just imprisoned, they slowly stripped her of her humanity, bit by bit. And it all began with an 8-year-old boy. Forget what you think you know about the guillotine. The blade that was seen as a merciful end, what came before was much darker. They found Marie Antoinette as one weakness, and they exploited it with a cruelty so deep that it still haunts us today. This is the story of prisoner 280, and I'm about to show you exactly what they did to her. On the night of July 3, 1793, at the Temple prison in Paris, Marie Antoinette was lying next to her 8-year-old son, Louis Charles. She hadn't let him out of her sights since the execution of his father 6 months earlier. Then, the door of her room exploded open. 6 guards flooded in, holding an official order they had come to take the boy. What followed would echo through those prison walls for an entire hour. Marie Antoinette, a former queen, transformed into a primal mother. She threw herself against the door screaming, begging them to take her instead. The room was filled with the sounds of her desperate cries. But here's what makes it worse, this wasn't random violence. It was calculated, and it was designed to break her. The revolutionaries had realized something crucial. They couldn't break her with physical torture. They couldn't starve her or humiliate her. But they could break her with what she loved most, her son. Let me tell you more about Marie Antoinette, because the woman they tortured in 1793 was far different from the caricature that the revolutionaries painted. Born Marie Antoinette in Vienna in 1755, she was an Austrian archduchess, the youngest daughter of Empress Maria Theresa. At just 14 years old, she was married off to Louis VI of France, not out of love, but for political alliance. The French court despised her, mocking her accent, her appearance, and even the way she dressed. Even her own husband ignored her for years, leaving their marriage unconsummated for 7 years, a humiliation that became public gossip. Marie Antoinette, isolated and alone, sought solace in luxury. She spent time on extravagant hairstyles, expensive gowns, and lavish parties at her private retreat, the Petit Trianon. The French people, who were starving and desperate, saw her extravagances and called her mad and deficit. The famous phrase, "let them eat cake," was something she ever said, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. By the time the revolution started in 1789, she had become the perfect scapegoat, a foreign queen who represented everything that was wrong with the monarchy. But by 1793, Marie Antoinette had already lost everything: her crown, her freedom, her husband, and her country. The revolutionaries, however, were about to show her that they could take even more. The Temple prison in Paris was designed to break its prisoners before they even reached the guillotine. A medieval fortress, dark and damp, it became her home after her husband's execution. She owned her to surviving children. 14-year-old Marie Antoinette and 8-year-old Louis Charles were locked away in a tower, watched at all times. Marie Antoinette tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, teaching her children lessons and praying with them. But the guards were always watching, taking notes, and reporting back to the revolutionary government. They quickly discovered Marie Antoinette's vulnerability. She could endure anything except threats to her children. So they started experimenting with psychological torture. They restricted access to her children's rooms, forcing her to beg for permission to see them. They installed additional guards inside their quarters and monitored every moment, every word spoken in the privacy of their family. Marie Antoinette's mental state began to unravel. Her hair, once brown, turned white due to stress. She stopped eating and developed hemorrhages, which she tried to hide from the guards. But she held on because she still had her children. Then, on July 3, 1793, they came for her son. 6 guards, with an official order, barged into her room. Marie Antoinette threw herself between the guards and Louis Charles, holding him tightly as he woke up crying. For an hour, she screamed and begged, refusing to let them take him. She fought with all her strength, but in the end, the guards dragged him away. The revolutionaries didn't just take her son, they planned to break him as well. Louis Charles was given to a man named Antoine Simon, a radical chosen specifically to destroy the boy. Simon locked him in a dark room, forced him to wear a revolutionary cap, and made him sing anti-monarchist songs. He was taught to curse his mother, to call her vile names, and to repeat accusations of treason. When he resisted, Simon beat him, starved him, and isolated him until the boy was broken. Marie Antoinette knew what was happening, but there was nothing she could do. The emotional toll was unbearable. On August 1, 1793, less than a month after the guards took her son, they transferred her to a new prison, the Conciergerie. It was known as the anti-minus chamber to the guillotine, where prisoners spent their final days before execution. She was given prisoner number 280. No longer a queen, no longer a queen, no longer a name, just a number. Her cell was tiny, dark, and oppressive. She was constantly under surveillance, with 2 guards watching her every move, every moment of her private life. She had no privacy, no dignity left. She became frail, barely speaking and often crying for her son. Her hair, completely white, started to fall out. At just 37 years old, she looked like an old woman. The trial that followed was a farce, a show meant to justify her execution. They accused her of treason and conspiracy, but the final blow came when they brought forward accusations allegedly made by her son, Louis Charles. Under intense spanking and torture, he claimed that his mother had committed incest with him. The revolutionaries had weaponized her own child against her. Marie Antoinette, now stripped of everything, stood in the courtroom, her voice shaking with emotion. "Is there among you a single mother who would not shudder at such an accusation?" she asked. But it didn't matter. The trial was a sham, and the verdict was already decided. On October 16, 1793, she was executed by guillotine. But in the final moments of her life, she did something remarkable. As she was led to the scaffold, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. "Pardon me, sir. I did not mean to do it," she said. In her last moments, she remained courteous, even in the face of her death. History remembers Marie Antoinette not just as a queen, but as a woman who faced unimaginable cruelty with dignity and grace. They tried to break her with psychological torture, to strip away her humanity, but they failed. She died as a mother, as a human being, someone who refused to be completely dehumanized. MarieAntoinette's death on October 16, 1793, by the guillotine, was not just the end of a life, but the culmination of a campaign of psychological destruction that had stretched for months. The revolutionaries, having already executed her husband and seen their monarchy fall, had tried to erase every vestige of royal authority. But it wasn't enough for them to kill her. They needed to destroy her spirit, break her will, and make sure her legacy would be nothing but one of humiliation. And they succeeded in their cruel mission. For in her final hours, even as she stood on the scaffold, her humanity was the one thing they cannot strip away. In the face of her execution, Marie Antoinette, broken but dignified, had one last moment of grace. The apology to her executioner, her last words to him, were an unexpected act of civility amidst the brutality. But what of the legacy she left behind? The history of Marie Antoinette has been distorted and manipulated by the revolutionaries' propaganda, transformed into a symbol of decadence, excess, and royal cruelty. The let them eat cake myth, which has often been used to paint her as an out-touch monarch, was a fabrication designed to rally public hatred. The real Marie Antoinette, however, was not the villain history made her out to be. She was a young woman thrown into an unforgiving political landscape, isolated and ridiculed. In her later years, she became a mother who fought fiercely for her children, one who endured unimaginable torment, not only from the revolutionaries but from the weight of her own position. Marie Antoinette's story is one of contradictions. She was not the wasteful, oblivious queen that her enemies portrayed. Instead, she was a complex woman who, despite the luxuries of her position, suffered from the immense pressures placed on her by the monarchy and the revolution. The revolutionaries may have succeeded in erasing her crown, her title, and her dignity, but they failed to erase her humanity. The final days of Marie Antoinette, and as a reminder of the brutal methods used to break a person, and the courage it took to maintain some semblance of self-respect amidst the cruelty. Her legacy, though clouded by the violence of her death, serves as a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. The question of how history remembers her is still up for debate. Is she the villainous queen whose extravagances helped spark the revolution? Or is she the tragic figure who, despite all the suffering and manipulation, maintained her humanity in the face of an unimaginable crisis? Her story doesn't just reflect the fall of a monarchy, it reflects the depths of human cruelty and the strength of a woman who, despite everything, faced her death with a strength that history cannot ignore. Marie Antoinette's death marked the end of an era for France. With the guillotine's blade descending on her, the revolutionaries achieved their goal, the symbolic and literal destruction of the monarchy. But what they failed to understand, and what history has revealed in hindsight, is that they did not destroy Marie Antoinette completely. They broke her body, but her story, her humanity endured. Her tragic end didn't just sever the last ties to the old regime, it exposed the darkest aspects of human nature. The revolutionaries, in their zeal to create a new republic, thought they could erase the past entirely. But by turning Marie Antoinette into a symbol of royal oppression, they inadvertently preserved the complexity of her life for future generations to study. Her suffering and the way it was manipulated by those in power are a reminder of the extremes that people can go to in their quest for control. The psychological warfare, the use of her own love for her children against her, the public humiliation, these were tools not just of punishment but of a deep, calculated cruelty. The revolutionaries didn't just want her dead, they wanted to break her down so thoroughly that her existence would be erased, reduced to a simple villain. But Marie Antoinette was just the caricature they painted. She was just a queen who lived in excess. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman who fought desperately to hold on to the pieces of her humanity in the face of systematic destruction. The emotional toll of losing her children, of watching them suffer, of being forced to witness the destruction of everything she had once known, this was the true tragedy. In the end, though the revolutionaries succeeded in executing Marie Antoinette, they couldn't take her dignity, her sense of self, or the love she had for her children. That strength, that defiance even in the face of the most degrading circumstances, lived on long after her death. Her legacy, shaped by centuries of myth and propaganda, is a complicated one. She is still viewed by many as the epitome of royal privilege gone awry, the cause of France's downfall, and a scapegoat for a society desperate for change. But in a more nuanced view, she becomes a symbol not of tyranny, but of the way societies use and destroy figures of power, how those who hold power can be broken and distorted by those who seek to bring them down. Despite the revolution's success in tearing down the monarchy, what they failed to destroy was the woman beneath the crown. In her final days, Marie Antoinette showed a strength that many would not have expected. She stood before the world, broken but not beaten, as a mother who was still willing to fight for her children. Her final act of grace, as the blade fell, was an act of humanity that resonates to this day. Her name is no longer just tied to the history of French royalty. She stands as a symbol of human endurance, a reminder that no matter how hard the world may try to break us, there is a part of us that cannot be touched upon, that remains unyielding to the end. In the years after her execution, the image of Marie Antoinette began to shift. Initially, she was depicted as the epitome of royal excess, an out-minus-of-minus touch queen who squandered her wealth while her people starved. The revolutionaries succeeded in turning her into a symbol of everything wrong with the monarchy, and for a time, the people of France saw her as the embodiment of their suffering. But as the revolution continued, and as the effects of her death settled into the fabric of history, her story began to be viewed through a more complex lens. Historians, scholars, and even the public slowly began to reconsider the narrative. The portrayal of Marie Antoinette as a frivolous, indifferent queen started to fade, replaced by a more sympathetic understanding of her plight. She was a young woman, far from her homeland, thrust into a political marriage to secure an alliance, and immediately thrust into the storm of royal expectations. She was isolated, mocked, and misunderstood, not just by the French court but by the revolutionaries who would ultimately imprison and execute her. Her attempts to escape her circumstances, seeking refuge in luxuries and retreats, like the Petit Trianon, were seen as attempts at survival in a world that had little place for someone like her. Marie Antoinette's early years in France were marked by humiliation and alienation, which only grew as her position as queen became more tenuous. Her final months in captivity only highlighted her humanity. Locked away in the temple prison, separated from her children, and constantly under surveillance, Marie Antoinette fought to maintain some semblance of dignity. Her defiance against the guards, her refusal to give in when they came for her son, and the heartbreak she endured in watching him suffer under the revolutionaries' manipulation, these were not the actions of a villain, but of a mother pushed to the edge. The image of Marie Antoinette as a victim, not just of the revolution, but of the brutal forces that sought to tear apart the monarchy, and everything she represented began to take shape. She became not just a symbol of the monarchy's fall, but a symbol of the consequences of revolution, the way it could concern not just the rulers but the very humanity of those caught in its path. In the years that followed, as France slowly recovered from the upheaval of the revolution, people began to see Marie Antoinette not as a mindless figure of excess, but as a woman who had been broken by the very forces that sought to remake the country. Her tragic fate became a reflection of the deep scars left by the revolution itself, an institution that, in its quest for justice and equality, had ultimately destroyed the very things it sought to protect. Marie Antoinette's legacy would be one of both tragedy and resilience. She died not as a queen but as a mother, the woman stripped of her crown and title, but not her dignity. In her final moments, she remained composed, even when facing one of the most humiliating and brutal deaths in history. Her apology to the executioner was not just a final moment of grace, it was a reminder that even in the darkest hours, there is humanity. Her story is one of contradictions, of a woman who lived both in excess and in deprivation, a queen who had everything and nothing at once. It's a reminder that history, especially when shaped by propaganda and revolution, often distorts the truth. Marie Antoinette was not the villain she was made out to be, nor was she the saint her later admirers would claim. She was a complex, deeply human figure whose final days demonstrated the resilience of the human spirit under unimaginable pressure. Today, we remember Marie Antoinette not just for her role in history, but for the strength she showed when everything else was stripped away. The revolutionaries who sought to destroy her legacy did so with cruelty and malice, but they couldn't take her humanity. That was something that no force, no revolution, could ever erase. Her story is not just about the fall of a monarchy, but about the limits of power and the resilience of the human soul. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of using one person as a symbol of an entire system's failings. And in her final moments, Marie Antoinette left behind a legacy of defiance, dignity, and above all humanity, something that the revolution could never take away. As time went on, Marie Antoinette's story became more than just a chapter in the French Revolution. It became a mirror reflecting the complexities of power, suffering, and human endurance. The long journey from being a queen reviled and mocked to a symbol of profound resilience and tragedy is a reminder of how history often distorts reality. While she had been painted as the cause of France's downfall, her real legacy reveals a far more complicated and humane narrative. In the years following her death, as France faced its own post-revolutionary reckoning, her story began to be revisited with a fresh perspective. No longer simply seen as a foreign queen who lived in extravagance, Marie Antoinette was reinterpreted as a woman caught in the vicious machinery of a revolution that promised liberty and equality, but delivered something far darker. Historians began to question the harshness with which she had been treated, asking why she, in particular, was targeted so ruthlessly. After all, she was not the sole architect of the monarchy's successes. She was a victim of a political system that had already been teetering on the brink of collapse, long before the revolutionaries ever came for her. Her personal failings, her spending habits, and her for an origin were convenient excuses for a revolution that needed a figurehead to embody everything that was wrong with the old regime. Yet, the tragedy of her final days reveals something even more critical about power. Revolutionaries, in their desire to upend the old order, went too far. The vengeance against Marie Antoinette became an attempt to dehumanize her, to strip away her identity as a person and reduce her to a symbol. But despite their efforts, they couldn't break her completely. Even as the revolutionaries moved to erase her dignity, she maintained a sense of grace that transcended the cruelty surrounding her. Her trial, which lasted only a matter of days, was a mere formality. The outcome was predetermined, but the spectacle served to justify the harsh punishment that awaited her. But despite being the focus of so much hatred and disdain, Marie Antoinette, in her final moments, was more human than many of those who condemned her. Her final act of grace, apologizing to the man who would execute her, was a final victory over the dehumanizing forces that sought to strip away her last shred of dignity. As the years passed and the French Revolution became part of history's collective memory, Marie Antoinette's death became less about the fall of the monarchy and more about the human cost of revolution. She was no longer just a symbol of royal excess, she became a symbol of the very human consequences of political extremism and the loss of empathy in the pursuit of justice. By the 19th and 20th centuries, Marie Antoinette had evolved from a figure of ridicule to one of sympathy. Films, books, and public discourse began to portray her as a tragic figure caught in the tides of history, a queen who did not have the luxury of choosing her fate. But even with these sympathetic portrayals, the complexity of her character remained. She was neither wholly villain nor victim, but a woman who faced extraordinary circumstances with an extraordinary strength. Her death, while marking the end of a royal era, also marked the beginning of a new understanding of power and its consequences. The revolutionaries, in their zeal to tear down the old order, had shown how the thirst for justice could spiral into cruelty, and how in the process, the human cost of revolution could be easily ignored. Marie Antoinette's story is a reminder that history is written by the victors, but it is also a reflection of how those who suffer under systems of power are often forgotten or distorted in the process. Her death and the suffering she endured became part of the larger narrative of the French Revolution, a revolution that sought to create a more just society, but ultimately delivered a reign of terror that affected everyone, even those who were not part of the aristocracy. In the end, Marie Antoinette's humanity, her motherhood, her compassion, her dignity became her true legacy. She was a queen, yes, but she was also a woman, a mother, and a human being who, despite everything, found a way to maintain her sense of self. The revolutionaries may have succeeded in stripping away her crown, her title, and her status, but they could never strip away her humanity. Today, where we reflect on her life and death, we remember not just a queen, but a person who endured unimaginable cruelty and humiliation, yet never gave up her dignity. MarieAntoinette's legacy is not one of excess or indulgence, but of resilience, grace, and the ultimate human will to survive in the face of unspeakable adversity. As time has passed, the narrative surrounding Marie Antoinette has continued to evolve, with each new generation revisiting her life and death through a different lens. What once began as an image of excess and indulgence has, over the centuries, been replaced with a more nuanced understanding of her character, her suffering, and the political forces that shaped her fate. In the decades following her death, the memory of Marie Antoinette became more than just a relic of the past. It became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked power, both from the monarchy she represented and from the revolutionaries who overthrew it. Her tragic end was a reflection of how the quest for justice, when taken to extremes, can lead to the dehumanization of those who are seen as enemies. Marie Antoinette was caught in the crossfire of a revolution that sought to bring about equality, but, in doing so, lost sight of the very human principles it claimed to uphold. The story of Marie Antoinette also speaks to the complexities of historical memory. The very same revolution that tore her life apart was the force that eventually shaped how the world viewed her. At first, she was reviled, her image crafted to represent everything wrong with the monarchy. But over time, as the dust of revolution settled, her image softened. The world began to recognize her as a tragic figure, one who had been manipulated, misunderstood, and ultimately destroyed by the same forces that had claimed to be liberating France. Modern historians, biographers, and filmmakers have continued to revisit her story, reinterpreting her life through a more sympathetic lens. Her final moments, her grace under pressure, and her undeniable humanity have become central to her legacy. No longer simply seen as the madame deficit of revolutionary propaganda, she is now viewed as a woman who faced unspeakable cruelty with strength and dignity. But perhaps the most significant shift in the way we view Marie Antoinette today is in how we understand the consequences of revolution. Her suffering is a tragic reminder that the desire to destroy one's enemies can lead to the destruction of the very humanity we seek to protect. The revolutionaries, in their zeal to create a new order, tore down not just the monarchy, but also the sense of empathy and justice that should have been at the heart of their ideals. Her story is also a lesson in the power of narrative and the way history is shaped by those who control the telling. Marie Antoinette was initially a villain in the eyes of the public, but over time, she has become a figure of empathy and compassion. History, it seems, has a way of reevaluating its heroes and villains, especially when the voices of those who suffered are finally given a chance to be heard. The end of Marie Antoinette's life was the end of an era for France. Her execution marked the final destruction of the old order, and her death symbolized the triumph of the revolutionaries. But as we look back on her legacy, we can see that she was more than just a symbol of royal excess. She was a person who, despite her faults and her circumstances, remained human until the very end. She fought for her children, and she faced death with a courage that few could have summoned in her position. In the end, the tragedy of Marie Antoinette's life and death is a reflection of the complexities of revolution. It is a story of how political systems and ideologies can dehumanize those caught in their wake. But it is also a story of resilience and grace, of a woman who, in the face of unspeakable cruelty, never lost her humanity. The revolutionaries may have succeeded in erasing her idol, but they could never erase the woman beneath it. Marie Antoinette's legacy today is not just one of royal privilege and decadence, but of enduring human dignity. She reminds us that, even in the darkest times, there is a part of us that remains unbroken, no matter the forces that try to tear it apart. As we look back on Marie Antoinette's life and death, we are reminded of the fragile balance between power and humanity. Her story is a complex one, filled with contradictions and nuances. She was not simply a queen living in luxury, nor was she just the villain painted by revolutionary propaganda. She was a woman, a mother, and a human being caught in the whirlwind of a revolution that, in its desire for justice, sometimes forgot the very principles of mercy and compassion it claimed to uphold. Her suffering at the hands of the revolutionaries, the psychological and emotional torment she endured, serves as a chilling reminder of the destructive potential of unchecked political fervor. Her trial, her final days in captivity, and her eventual execution by guillotine are not just the story of the fall of a queen, but the story of a system that sought to destroy an individual body and spirit in the name of an ideal. Yet, through it all, Marie Antoinette remained defiant in her humanity. Her actions, particularly her final moments, speak volumes about her character. She chose to face her death with dignity, even in the most humiliating circumstances. Her apology to the executioner, a small but poignant moment of grace, revealed a profound sense of compassion that transcended her status. It was an act that was both deeply human and shockingly out of place in the brutal world of revolutionary France. The more we learn about Marie Antoinette, the more we see that she was a woman trapped by her circumstances. Born into a royal family, married off for political reasons, and thrust into the spotlight of French court life, she was never truly free to define her own life. Her extravagance, her indulgence in luxury, was often a response to the isolation and the emotional void she experienced as a young woman in a foreign land. The very things that would later be used to condemn her were the same things that helped her survive in a world where she had few other options. What the revolutionaries failed to understand was that Marie Antoinette, for all her flaws and mistakes, was also a victim of the system she represented. Her tragic fate was not just the result of royal excess or political incompetence. It was the inevitable outcome of a society that demanded scapegoats for its own failings. She became the perfect target for an queen isolated from her people, whose every move could be twisted into a symbol of everything wrong with the monarchy. In the end, her death was less about justice and more about the revolutionaries' need to create a narrative that justified their violent actions. Today, as we reflect on her life, we see a woman who was much more than the caricature that was created in her time. Marie Antoinette was a mother who loved her children deeply, a queen who, in the end, was stripped of everything that gave her identity, but who retained her humanity until the very end. Her story serves as a reminder that history is often unwritten by the victors, but it is also shaped by the stories of those who suffer in silence. Her legacy, once tarnished by the revolution's propaganda, is now seen in a more sympathetic light. She is no longer just the symbol of royal excess and privilege, but a tragic figure who endured immense hardship with remarkable grace. Her death, though tragic, serves as a lesson about the dangers of political zealotry and the human cost of revolutions that forget the principles of compassion. In the end, Marie Antoinette's life and death are a testament to the power of humanity in the face of extreme adversity. The revolutionaries may have destroyed her position, her crown, and her idol, but they could not take away her soul. Her final moments, her courage in the face of unimaginable cruelty, have ensured that her story is not one of simple defeat, but one of resilience. Marie Antoinette, through her suffering, showed the world that even in the darkest moments, there is still room for grace, for dignity, and for the enduring strength of the human spirit. Her story, tragic as it is, stands as a powerful reminder that no matter how hard the world tries to break us, the core of who we are cannot be destroyed. The final chapter of Marie Antoinette's life is more than just a story of royal downfall. It is a poignant reflection on the human condition and the consequences of political extremism. Her story, once dominated by accusations of excess and waste, has been reclaimed by time and perspective, transforming her into a figure of tragic complexity. As the dust of revolution settled, the lessons of her suffering began to emerge with clarity, and her fate continues to resonate as a cautionary tale. In her death, Marie Antoinette's humanity shone brighter than any crown or title could. The revolutionaries, in their zeal to destroy the old order, sought to strip her of everything that defined her as a person. But in their pursuit of vengeance, they inadvertently revealed the most powerful part of her indomitable spirit. Despite the psychological torment, the manipulation of her son, the physical abuse, and the constant surveillance, she did not break. Instead, she endured with a level of grace that the revolutionaries never expected. Her final trial, a grotesque mockery of justice, exposed the hollowness of the revolution's ideals. Despite being accused of the most vile crimes, including the monstrous lie about her relationship with her son, Marie Antoinette refused to bend. She responded to each false accusation with calm. But it was her appeal to the mothers in the courtroom, her final, raw expression of maternal love, that shattered the facade of revolutionary righteousness. It was in that moment that she became more than just a queen. She became a mother, an ordinary woman standing in front of a public tribunal, fighting for the love and dignity of her child. The revolutionaries, in their desire to dehumanize her, overlooked the power of human connection. By using her own child to break her, they underestimated the strength of maternal love. They thought they could reduce her to a symbol of royal decadence, but in doing so, they failed to destroy what made her most human. In her final moments, she showed the world that her humanity could not be reduced to the role of queen. She was, at her core, a mother, a woman who loved her children with an intensity that no political ideology could touch. As the revolution progressed, the bloodshed intensified, and the ideal of a republic based on liberty and equality became clouded by the very terror it had sought to escape. The execution of Marie Antoinette was one of the most brutal acts in a series of violent purges. Yet, in the years that followed, the revolution's success in toppling the monarchy began to show its own dark consequences. The ideals of the revolution, equality, justice, and freedom, were eroded by the same forces that had once sought to overthrow tyranny. Marie Antoinette's death, while an undeniable moment in the revolution's history, also marked the beginning of a legacy of political violence that would haunt France for years to come. The tragedy of her execution lies not just in the loss of a queen, but in the revelation of what the revolutionaries had become. In their pursuit of justice, they had sacrificed the very values they claimed to uphold. But over time, as France and the world reflected on the revolution and its aftermath, Marie Antoinette's legacy slowly transformed. From a symbol of royal corruption, she became a figure of sympathy, a woman trapped by history and politics, whose death was as much a casualty of revolution as the monarchy she represented. Modern historians have come to view her not just as a queen, but as a victim of political forces far beyond her control. The brutality she faced, the emotional and psychological torment she endured, and the way she was stripped of her humanity have become central themes in the story of her life. Marie Antoinette's story is a testament to the human capacity to endure suffering, to resist dehumanization, and to hold on to one's identity in the face of unimaginable cruelty. She was not perfect, but she was not the villain history once portrayed her as. She was a woman who faced her end with dignity, a mother who fought for her children, and a person who remained to the last, unbroken by the forces that sought to destroy her. Her legacy is a reminder of the complexities of history, the way it is shaped by those in power and the ways in which the victims are often forgotten or misrepresented. But history, in its long arc, can also redeem. Today, Marie Antoinette is remembered not just for the wealth and excess of her early life, but for the strength and humanity she demonstrated in her final days. Her death was a turning point in history, not just for France, but for the world. It forced us to reckon with the human cost of revolution, with the price of political violence, and with the consequences of stripping away the humanity of those we deem our enemies. Marie Antoinette's story, once seen as a tale of royal indulgence, is now understood as a tragedy of a woman who endured, who resisted, and who, in the end, retained her dignity in a world that had sought to erase it. Her death may have marked the end of the monarchy, but it also marked the beginning of a new understanding of the power of human resilience. In the years following Marie Antoinette's death, her memory evolved further, shaped by the changing tides of history and the shifting attitudes toward monarchy, revolution, and human rights. As the centuries passed, Marie Antoinette's image became less about the excesses of her court and more about the immense personal suffering she endured. By the late 19th and 20th centuries, she had largely shed the label of the villainous queen and had been transformed into a symbol of tragic innocence. One of the most remarkable aspects of Marie Antoinette's posthumous legacy is how she came to represent something larger than just the fall of a royal family. She became a figure in a wider conversation about power, vulnerability, and the human cost of political upheaval. Her story became emblematic of how the powerful are often seen as symbols to be torn down in the name of revolution, only for the real person beneath to be forgotten in the process. The intense personal torment she faced during her imprisonment, her isolation, the psychological manipulation of her children, and the cruelty she endured has prompted many to reflect on the nature of revolution and its capacity to destroy both the oppressed from the oppressed. In the 20th century, the French Revolution began to be viewed in a more nuanced light. No longer seen as purely a heroic struggle for liberty, but also as a cautionary tale of how the pursuit of political ideals can lead to monstrous acts. Marie Antoinette, once a symbol of the monarchy's successes, was now seen as a victim of the very forces that sought to liberate the French people. Her death was the climax of a violent, chaotic period in France's history, but it also marked the beginning of a deeper reflection on the costs of revolution. The 20th century also saw a renewed interest in her character through literature, film, and art. Films like Marie Antoinette 2006 sought to capture her complexity, showing her not just as a queen, but as a woman who faced tremendous personal hardship. These portrayals tried to move beyond the myth of the Madame Deficit and show the emotional toll of a woman who had been publicly vilified and humiliated, not just for her role as a queen, but for being a woman in a system that had no place for her vulnerability. The film and others like it offered a more humanizing perspective, one that showed Marie Antoinette as more than just a symbol of royal excess, but a woman lost in a world that rejected her. In recent years, historians have continued to explore the psychological aspects of Marie Antoinette's imprisonment and execution. Her story is now often studied through the lens of karma, as a case study of how political and personal upheaval can manifest in a person's psyche. The dehumanizing conditions of her captivity, her isolation from her children, and the relentless psychological and emotional manipulation she endured have become central to understanding the suffering she experienced. The revolutionaries may have stripped her of her royal title, her dignity, and her freedom, but in the process, they also revealed the deep vulnerability that lay beneath her public persona. What emerges from this reflection is a more nuanced understanding of Marie Antoinette as a woman trapped by both her circumstances and her identity. She was not merely a queen, she was a pawn in the larger game of European politics. Her marriage to Louis XVI, orchestrated by her family for political reasons, thrust her into a world where her personal feelings were secondary to the interests of empire. But in the final months of her life, when everything else had been taken from her, she became something more than a pawn. She became a symbol of the human cost of revolution, torn between love for her children and the cruel political forces at play. Her story in the end is a reminder of how history often distorts its figures, show villains are made, and how victims are forgotten. For all the attempts by the revolutionaries to break her spirit, they could never erase her humanity. She died with a sense of grace and dignity that in the eyes of history would come to define her legacy, not as a queen, but as a woman who faced unimaginable suffering and, despite everything, maintained her humanity until the very end. As we look back on Marie Antoinette's story, it serves as a lesson about the complexities of power, revolution, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Her life was not one of privilege alone, it was also one marked by isolation, grief, and suffering. Her final act, standing before the guillotine with courage, even as the crowd jeered, was the culmination of a life lived in the shadow of a monarchy that ultimately collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Today we remember Marie Antoinette not just for the scandalous rumors or her extravagant lifestyle, but for the woman she was, the mother who fought to protect her children, the queen who bore her burdens in silence, and the person who, even in the face of the guillotine, remained resolute. Her story, tragic and complex, is a reminder that history is often not as simple as it seems, and that the people caught in its currents, whether they be kings, queens, or commoners, are often far more complicated than the labels we place upon them. In recent years, Marie Antoinette's legacy has become a point of intersection between history, culture, and the psychology of political upheaval. Today, she is remembered not merely as a figurehead of royal excess, but as an emblem of the way power dynamics, when pushed to extremes, can distort both the ruler and the ruled. As her story continues to be examined, it's clear that Marie Antoinette's death was not only the end of a queen but the end of an era, a moment in history when the tides of revolution forever altered the course of a nation, and, by extension, the world. Her life and death continue to hold lessons about the dangers of dehumanizing one's political opponents. Marie Antoinette became a convenient scapegoat, the focal point for every grievance the French people had with the monarchy. But in her, the revolutionaries also revealed the vulnerability inherent in all systems of power, no matter how grand. Through her, they showcased the deep personal costs of their ideals. They had hoped to break her completely, to erase her from the annals of history, but in their obsession with destroying her identity as a queen, they unwittingly made her into something greater, a symbol of the fragility of human existence when torn apart by forces beyond one's control. What's often overlooked in the discussions surrounding Marie Antoinette is how she was used as a tool in the political struggles of the time. Her image was crafted by both her detractors and admirers, and in both versions, she became something of a mirror, reflecting the fears and desires of the people who judged her. To her enemies, she was the embodiment of everything wrong with the old regime, decadent, out of touch, and blind to the suffering of the people. To her defendants, she was a queen unjustly vilified and sacrificed by a revolution that sought not justice but vengeance. As modern scholars dive deeper into her psychological profile, what emerges is a portrait of a woman who was perhaps more misunderstood than malicious. She was a queen who spent her early years in France isolated from her family, mocked for her foreign origins, and blamed for the economic woes of a nation in turmoil. When viewed through this lens, the extravagant spending that marked her early reign becomes less an act of selfishness and more a desperate attempt to cling to the little control she had over her life in a court filled with power struggles. She was young, isolated, and in many ways powerless. In her final days, however, she became a figure who could no longer be reduced to these labels. The revolutionaries, in their attempt to break her, revealed something profound about her character. She remained, even in her anarchist moments, an unbroken human being. Despite everything, she fought for her children, tried to maintain some semblance of her dignity, and faced death with the courage of a mother who had already lost everything. Even as she was dragged through the streets of Paris, humiliated in front of the very people who had once been her subjects, she remained steadfast. This final grace, the act of dignity amid utter degradation, is perhaps what history remembers most. In her last moments as she stood before the guillotine, she offered an apology not to her executioners for her supposed crimes, but to the man she had accidentally stepped on during her arch to death. It was a final, unexpected moment of humanity that not only shocked the crowds, but also showed the depth of her character. Her final letter, never delivered, is another profound piece of her legacy. Written to her sister -in-law, Madame Elizabeth, it is filled with personal reflections on her life, love for her children, and a calm acceptance of her fate. It was the last act of a mother who, in the face of death, had nothing left to protect but her own children's futures. Her final words, written in isolation, spoke to the enduring love she had for her family. And they are the final testament to the woman she had always been beneath the weight of her crown and her title. Marie Antoinette's story has continued to evolve, and her legacy, once marred by the horrors of the revolution, has been reclaimed in modern times as one of resilience, dignity, and humanity. Today, we see in her not just a figure of royal excess, but a woman who, despite all her flaws, endured immense suffering and tragedy. Her death, while a moment of finality, was not just an ending, it was a new beginning, a turning point in how we view power, revolution, and the lives caught in their wake. Her legacy continues to inspire discussions about the balance between public perception and private reality, the consequences of political violence, and the lasting impact of trauma. Marie Antoinette was more than just a queen, more than just a symbol of aristocracy. She was a woman who faced insurmountable odds. And in the end, it was her humanity that endured, transcending the twisted narratives built around her. The history of Marie Antoinette, when viewed through the lens of modern reflection, is no longer simply the tale of a monarch's downfall. It is a story of survival of a woman who, despite all efforts to strip away her identity, refused to be erased. And in doing so, she became a lasting symbol not of the excesses of royalty, but of the strength of the human spirit in the face of relentless cruelty. As the centuries have passed, MarieAntoinette's story has taken on new layers, shifting from one of royal tragedy to a more universal symbol of endurance in the face of adversity. Her transformation from villain to victim to, ultimately, a complex figure of resilience, speaks volumes about how history can distort the truth, but also how time, perspective, and changing societal values can alter the narrative. Today, the story of Marie Antoinette is not just the story of a fallen queen, but a story of a woman who faced unimaginable suffering, yet somehow held on to the essential parts of her humanity. In recent years, historians have been more willing to take a broader, more empathetic view of Marie Antoinette. The narrative that once depicted her as the epitome of selfish indulgence has been challenged, as more information about her emotional and psychological state during her imprisonment has come to light. The fact that she endured not only physical confinement, but mental and emotional torture through the exploitation of her relationship with her children changes the way we understand her. The revolutionaries who sought to destroy her didn't just want to tear down the monarchy, they wanted to break her spirit. And in their cruelty, they created a story that would reverberate through history, but not in the way they intended. Marie Antoinette's psychological torment, especially her separation from her son, Louis Charles, has become central to how we interpret her final years. The decision to manipulate her love for her children, to break her heart by forcing her to watch them suffer, was perhaps the most calculated and cruel tactic of the revolutionaries. It was a brutal form of psychological warfare, one that showed their understanding of human nature and their ability to exploit her maternal instincts to the fullest. What is striking him as part of her story is that despite everything, despite the horrors, the degradation, the isolation, Marie Antoinette never stopped fighting. She fought for her children, even when she knew that her efforts were doomed. She fought for dignity, even when it seemed there was nothing left to defend. She fought against the revolutionaries' attempts to strip her of everything, and in the process, she became a symbol of something far greater than herself. In her final moments, when she faced the guillotine, her grace and composure were a direct challenge to the dehumanizing forces that sought to reduce her to nothing more than a royal figurehead. MarieAntoinette's last moments, her final act of grace when she apologized to her executioner, are a testament to her humanity. She could have been reduced to the image of a broken woman, but instead, she chose to maintain her dignity. She chose to be a mother, to be a person in those last moments, offering her apology, not just to the man who would kill her, but to the world watching. It was a final refusal to be merely a symbol, a final act of defiance in a system that wanted to erase her entirely. Her legacy, as time has shown, is far more complicated than history first allowed. The transformation of Marie Antoinette from a scapegoat to a symbol of victimhood, then to a figure of dignity and grace, reflects a broader cultural shift in how we understand power, privilege, and the people caught in its crossfire. Her story no longer serves merely as a cautionary tale about the dangers of excess. It is now a reflection of how political movements with a revolution or monarchy can be just as destructive to those in power as to those they claim to liberate. The human cost of political violence is often not just the lives taken, but the lives destroyed in the process. In many ways, Marie Antoinette's story is a warning about the dangers of extremism, the cost of sacrificing human dignity in the name of political ideals. The revolutionaries who sought to destroy her were blinded by their own vision of justice, forgetting that justice, if it comes at the cost of humanity, is a hollow victory. Marie Antoinette's life and death show that even in the most political of struggles, the human element must never be ignored. Today, her story has become one of resilience. In the face of unimaginable cruelty, she did not collapse into a broken, submissive figure. Instead, she showed the world what it means to be human in the darkest circumstances. Her dignity, her courage, and her strength continue to resonate, reminding us that even in the face of oppressive power, the human spirit has the capacity to endure. In the end, Marie Antoinette's legacy is not defined by the monarchy she represented, nor by the revolution that destroyed her. Her legacy is defined by her humanity. She was not just a queen, she was a woman who loved her children, who endured the impossible, and who never lost her sense of self, even as the world around her crumbled. Her story stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the unbreakable strength of a mother's love, and the capacity for grace even in the most dire of circumstances. As we move further into the 21st century, Marie Antoinette's legacy continues to inspire conversations not just about history, but about human resilience, the effects of power, and the way society views its leaders and victims. Her story is often invoked in discussions about the consequences of political extremism, the dehumanization of enemies, and the price of revolution. In many ways, her death symbolizes a larger historical truth that revolutions, while born out of the desire for justice, can sometimes lead to their own excesses, resulting in a cycle of violence that consumes both the oppressed and the oppressors. Marie Antoinette's death by guillotine was not just an execution, it was a statement, a political act that demonstrated the revolution's complete rejection of the old regime. But in their efforts to create a new world, the revolutionaries unintentionally exposed the darkness within their own ranks. Her suffering, manipulated and twisted for political gain, showed that revolution, when taken to extremes, could strip away the very humanity it was meant to protect. One of the reasons Marie Antoinette's legacy has endured in such a multifaceted way is that her story speaks to timeless themes. The abuse of power, the vulnerability of the innocent, and the way public figures are often distorted by propaganda are still very much relevant today. Her experience offers a powerful warning that the pursuit of justice and the desire to overturn oppressive systems can, if not tempered by compassion, lead to a new kind of cruelty. In modern conversations about historical figures, Marie Antoinette is no longer solely regarded as the queen who lived in luxury while her people starved. She is a symbol of how power can corrupt perception, and how figures in the public, whether rulers or revolutionaries, are often misrepresented or exploited for the benefit of those seeking to gain control. This is especially pertinent in an era where the media plays an outsized role in shaping the public's perception of individuals. Much like how Marie Antoinette was unfairly labeled as Madame Deficit today, public figures are often defined by the narratives spun around them, rather than by their true, multifaceted selves. Her story is also a testament to the enduring strength of individuals caught in the crosshairs of political upheaval. While she is often seen as a tragic victim of the revolution, her legacy also reflects the larger human experience. Despite the physical and psychological torment she endured, Marie Antoinette managed to hold on to her dignity until the very end. In doing so, she became a symbol not just of royal privilege, but of human resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. In literature and popular culture, Marie Antoinette has found a place as a symbol of the human cost of revolution. Her image has been reimagined in countless ways, from the lavish to the sympathetic. Films, books, and even art have explored the complexities of her character, her loneliness, her grief, and her ultimate defiance. These modern portrayals have helped to humanize a figure who was once vilified, giving us a glimpse into the inner turmoil of a woman trapped by circumstances far beyond her control. But there is more to her story than the crown she wore or the extravagance of her court. There is a depth of emotion, of motherhood, and of suffering that transcends the political drama of her time. The central tragedy of her life, the separation from her children, the psychological torture she endured, is a reflection of how deeply personal losses often go unrecognized in the face of larger political struggles. While the revolutionaries were focused on dismantling the monarchy, they failed to see the deeply human pain that came with destroying a family. Perhaps then, the most powerful lesson of Marie Antoinette's story is the importance of compassion. The revolution's refusal to recognize her humanity ultimately led to a tragedy, not just for her, but for the revolution itself. It exposed the dangers of a revolution that sacrifices empathy for ideology, an ideology that seeks to destroy not just the system, but the people within it. In the grand arc of history, Marie Antoinette's life and death show that those who are crushed by political forces are not just victims of their circumstances, but also representatives of the toll that political violence takes on individuals. Her story is an enduring reminder that, no matter how far removed a person may be from the center of power, they are still fundamentally human. And in the end, it is the humanity of the individual, their love, their grief, their courage that survives, even when the systems that oppress them fall apart. Looking back on her life today, We can see in Marie Antoinette not just a tragic figure of the past, but a timeless symbol of the resilience of the human spirit. She faced horrors that few can imagine, but she never lost her humanity. She reminds us that even in the face of history's darkest moments, there is a capacity for grace, for dignity, and for the unyielding will to endure. As we continue to reflect on Marie Antoinette's story, it's important to recognize how her life and death have shaped our understanding of history and its complexities. Her execution was not just the end of a monarchy, but a turning point in how we view the relationship between those in power and the people they rule. Marie Antoinette's tragic demise serves as a stark reminder of how easily humanity can be stripped away in the name of political ideals. Yet, even in the darkest moments, her resilience remains a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit. One of the most profound aspects of her story is how her legacy has evolved over time. What was once a narrative of villainy and excess has gradually transformed into one of empathy and human complexity. As the years passed and the harshness of revolutionary fervor began to fade, historians and cultural commentators started to reconsider Marie Antoinette's life, not as the caricature of the idle queen, but as a woman caught in a whirlwind of political events beyond her control. Her story is also a reminder of the fragility of public perception. Like many figures in history, Marie Antoinette was shaped and ultimately destroyed by the narratives written about her. Initially, she was vilified as the cause of France's economic woes, accused of being selfish and out of touch with the suffering of her people. But over time, as new perspectives emerged, we began to see her as more than just the symbol of aristocratic excess. We saw a woman who, despite being thrust into a life of political theater, did her best to protect her family and maintain her dignity under extraordinary circumstances. In many ways, Marie Antoinette's story mirrors the experience of countless figures throughout history who are caught in the tide of political change. She was a product of her time, a victim of a system that exploited her position for political gain. And like many other individuals throughout history, her story became a casualty of the very forces that sought to reshape society. Yet despite all the propaganda, despite the cruelty, Marie Antoinette's humanity persisted. It was in her refusal to break, in her moments of grace and dignity, that her true legacy began to shine through. In the end, Marie Antoinette's life and death challenge us to think critically about how we view power and its effects on individuals. Her story isn't just about a queen or a revolution, it's about the dangers of reducing people to symbols, of stripping them of their humanity for the sake of political or ideological expedience. It's a reminder that, even in the most turbulent of times, we must never lose sight of the individuals behind the headlines, behind the political drama. We must never forget that behind every crown, every title, there is a person, a human being with hopes, fears, and above all the capacity to endure. Her death by guillotine was, of course, the end of an era in France, but it was also the beginning of a new narrative, a narrative that, over time, would reveal the true cost of revolution. The revolutionaries who executed Marie Antoinette may have believed they were serving justice, but in doing so, they inadvertently exposed the flaws in their own revolution. They had sought to destroy the monarchy, but in their pursuit of justice, they had lost sight of what made them human in the first place. Marie Antoinette's death is a reminder that the pursuit of justice, when taken to extremes, can lead to its own brand of tyranny. Her story also offers us important lessons about the dangers of scapegoating, of using individuals as stand-in for larger societal issues. Marie Antoinette was an easy target for revolutionaries looking for someone to blame for the problems of France. Yet, her treatment in the years leading up to her execution exposes the dangers of political expediency. In their desire to tear down the monarchy, the revolutionaries failed to see the human cost of their actions. Marie Antoinette, like so many figures in history, became a casualty of a political system that sought to use her as a symbol of everything that was wrong, even though she herself was a victim of that system. As we continue to study Marie Antoinette's legacy, we must remember that she was not just a figure of the past, but a reflection of the human condition. Her story transcends her time and place, offering timeless lessons about power, politics, and the resilience of the human spirit. She faced unimaginable cruelty, yet she never lost her humanity. Even in the face of her execution, she held on to her dignity and grace, offering us a powerful example of how to endure in the face of overwhelming adversity. The story of Marie Antoinette will continue to evolve as we revisit history with new perspectives. As we do so, we must remember that her life was not simply one of privilege or excess, but one marked by isolation, grief, and ultimately resilience. Her legacy is not just about the monarchy or the revolution, it is about the enduring power of the human spirit to survive even the darkest moments in history. As we continue to explore the life and death of Marie Antoinette, it becomes clear that her story holds many lessons that are still relevant today. The political and personal circumstances surrounding her life offer us insight into how individuals can be manipulated, misrepresented, and ultimately destroyed by the forces of political power. The tragic story of Marie Antoinette forces us to reckon with how history is shaped by the stories we tell about those in power, and how, in the pursuit of justice or change, we can sometimes lose sight of the humanity of those caught in the middle. Her story is also a reminder that no one, not even those with the highest titles, is immune to the forces of history. The monarchy, which once represented absolute power, crumbled under the weight of social, economic, and political pressures. But the fall of the monarchy was not a simple victory, it was a moment that exposed the complexities of revolution and the personal costs of societal upheaval. While Marie Antoinette's execution marked the end of an era, it also revealed how revolutionaries, in their zeal to tear down the old order, could inadvertently perpetuate a cycle of violence and dehumanization. Marie Antoinette, once a symbol of royal privilege and decadence, became the ultimate victim of this cycle. And yet, despite the relentless cruelty she faced, her dignity remained intact. Even when the world around her sought to strip away her humanity, she held on to her sense of self. Her last moments, marked by the apology to the executioner and her final words to her sister -in-law, are a testament to the strength of character that can survive even the most brutal of circumstances. In this sense, her story is not just about the fall of a queen, it is about the strength of the human spirit and the way in which individuals can be shaped by and respond to the forces of power and politics. Her life and death stand as a powerful reminder that, no matter how much power a person may have, they are always at the mercy of the systems they are part of. And while systems of power can attempt to break an individual down, they cannot erase the essence of what makes them human. Her legacy also speaks to the ways in which history often distorts the truth, especially when political agendas are at play. The revolutionaries who executed Marie Antoinette did so in the name of justice. But in doing so, they ignored the fundamental human cost of their actions. The propaganda that painted her as a villain served to justify her execution. But in hindsight, we can see that it was not her actions that led to her downfall, but rather the political forces around her that sought to destroy everything she represented. Her death became a symbol of the dangers of political extremism. It wasn't just the monarchy that was destroyed, it was the idea that power could be wielded without compassion, without consideration for the lives of those affected. The revolutionaries, in their pursuit of justice, lost sight of the very humanity they sought to protect. Marie Antoinette's story serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of empathy, even in the most turbulent of times. In the quest to build a new world, we must be careful not to lose sight of the human beings who inhabit it. But despite the political forces that tried to break her, Marie Antoinette's story transcends the politics of her time. Her legacy is not one of royalty, wealth, or privilege. It is a legacy of human endurance. Her strength and grace under pressure have left an indelible mark on history. Her story shows that, no matter the odds, it is possible to retain one's humanity even when the world seeks to strip it away. It is a reminder that dignity can survive even the most dehumanizing experiences. Marie Antoinette's life also highlights the challenges of living in a world where public perception often overrides personal reality. In her time, she was judged harshly for her appearance, her mannerisms, and her inability to conform to the expectations of the French court. In today's world, public figures are still subject to similar scrutiny, often for superficial reasons that do not reflect the true complexity of their lives. The media plays a significant role in shaping public opinion, often distorting the reality of a person's life for the sake of a narrative. Marie Antoinette's life serves as a reminder of the dangers of reducing individuals to symbols, of losing sight of their humanity in the process. Her final letter, intercepted by her jailers and never delivered, is another poignant example of how history often silences the voices of those it seeks to condemn. In her letter, she poured out her love for her children and her regret at leaving them behind. Her last words, written in the solitude of her prison cell, reveal a woman who had not given up, who still clung to the hope that her children would be cared for after her death. But that hope, like so many other things in her life, was denied. The letter never reached its intended recipient, and Marie Antoinette's final words to her family were lost in the archives of history, only to be discovered years later. This lost letter is a haunting reminder of how those who suffer are often silenced by history. Marie Antoinette, like so many other historical figures, was denied the chance to speak for herself in her final days. Her voice was drowned out by the political forces around her. But in the years that followed, her story was rediscovered, and her humanity was recognized once again. The tragic irony is that the revolutionaries, in trying to erase her legacy, actually ensured that it would live on in the minds of future generations. Today, when we remember Marie Antoinette, we remember not just a queen, but a woman who lived through extraordinary trials and emerged, in her final moments, with her dignity intact. Her story transcends the politics of her time and speaks to the universal human experience of suffering, survival, and resilience. Her legacy is not just about the fall of the monarchy. It is about the unyielding strength of the human spirit, and the ways in which individuals can endure, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. As we continue to reflect on the enduring legacy of Marie Antoinette, her story offers a critical lens through which we can understand the impact of personal suffering on the course of history. Her life, marked by her political marriage and the lavish lifestyle that became the subject of much criticism, is often reduced to the surface-level details of excess and royal privilege. However, the true depths of her story, the grief, isolation, and psychological torment she endured, reveal a more complex figure, whose humanity persisted, even in the face of unrelenting cruelty. In many ways, her journey from a young, somewhat naive artist to the final days of imprisonment in the conciergerie mirrors the broader experience of women in history. The Marie Antoinette's position in society was one of immense privilege, the expectations placed on her were crushing. Her life was dictated by the political needs of her family and the alliance between France and Austria, leaving little room for personal agency. While her actions and lifestyle would later be harshly criticized, they were, in many ways, the result of a life shaped by the manipulations of court politics and the public that demanded perfection from its monarchs. Marie Antoinette's plight also reminds us of the ways in which women have historically been used as pawns in the political games of men. Her marriage to Louis XVI was a strategic alliance, and her role as queen was defined by her ability to produce heirs and solidify her country's alliances. Yet, despite her pivotal position in the monarchy, she was never allowed to define her own life. Instead, she was often reduced to a symbol of everything wrong with the aristocracy marked for her for an origin. Her lavish lifestyle, and her perceived indifference to the struggles of the French people. These judgments were amplified by the revolutionaries who saw her as the embodiment of the old regime. In this way, her story becomes not just one of royal downfall, but a commentary on the gendered and class-based power structures that have historically shaped women's lives. The cruelty she experienced in her final days, especially the psychological torment of watching her son, Louis Charles, being manipulated and turned against her, further highlights the ways in which personal suffering can be weaponized by those in power. It is almost impossible to fathom the emotional devastation she must have felt, knowing that her child, the last piece of her royal identity, was being forced to betray her. The revolutionaries, in their attempts to break her, understood one simple truth: the strongest force in her life was her love for her children. And it was this love that they twisted and used against her, understanding that if they could destroy that bond, they could destroy her. As we consider the historical implications of her story, we are faced with a broader question: how does history shape the legacies of those who were caught in its tides? Marie Antoinette's life is a reflection of the ways in which the stories of powerful individuals are often reduced to simple caricatures by the forces that seek to control the narrative. For centuries, she was seen as the quintessential other for unqueen, a symbol of excess and depravity. In reality, however, she was far more complex. She was a woman who experienced the loss of her own childhood, who struggled with the pressures of being a queen in a foreign land, and who ultimately became a mother whose love for her children was weaponized by her enemies. Her suffering, much of it endured in silence, was magnified by the way her personal story was framed by the political forces around her. In many ways, Marie Antoinette's legacy reflects the way history is often written by the victors, who shape the narrative to serve their purposes. The revolutionaries saw her as the embodiment of everything wrong with the monarchy, and they used their power to erase her humanity, reducing her to nothing more than a symbol of royal excess. In doing so, they robbed the world of the chance to understand the complexities of her character, her experiences, and the depth of her suffering. Today, however, as we re-examine her life through a more empathetic lens, we begin to see Marie Antoinette not as a villain but as a victim of circumstance, a woman caught in the crossfire of political upheaval, and a mother whose love for her children was exploited in the cruelest way possible. Her story challenges us to reconsider our approach to historical figures, especially those who have been vilified by propaganda, and to seek a deeper understanding of the forces that shaped their lives and the consequences of those forces. One of the most enduring aspects of her legacy is the way she faced her death. Even as she was led to the guillotine, humiliated, and mocked by the crowd, she retained a sense of dignity. The moment when she apologized to the executioner, though small in comparison to the brutality she had faced, was a remarkable act of grace. In the face of unimaginable cruelty, she chose to remain human, to remain dignified. This final act of kindness and composure, in a moment where many would have crumbled, underscores the enduring strength of her character. Even when all was lost, Marie Antoinette did not lose the core of who she was, a woman capable of empathy and compassion, even toward the man who would take her life. In the end, the story of Marie Antoinette is not just one of royal tragedy, but of the resilience of the human spirit. Her suffering, her degradation, and her final moments of grace offer us a powerful lesson about the enduring strength of humanity, even when it seems to have been stripped away. Her legacy teaches us that, no matter how deeply we may fall, there is always a part of us that can rise above the forces that seek to destroy us. Marie Antoinette's legacy is intertwined with the broader themes of power, suffering, and the complexities of political transformation. While she was once seen as a symbol of royal excess and privilege, over time, her story has been reframed to reflect her humanity. Today, we see her not as a villain, but as a victim of the political forces that ultimately lead to her downfall. Her story reminds us that the personal costs of revolution are often overlooked in the pursuit of ideological goals. The revolutionaries who sought to bring justice to France by dismantling the monarchy didn't just target the institution of the crown, they went after the people who embodied it. Marie Antoinette, who had once been the Queen of France, became a casualty of this pursuit, her humanity stripped away by those who viewed her as the embodiment of everything that was wrong with the monarchy. The revolutionaries failed to see that Marie Antoinette was more than just a queen. She was a woman, a mother, and a human being. She was someone who, despite being thrust into the position of royalty for political reasons, had her own hopes, fears, and struggles. Her final days, filled with psychological torment, emotional manipulation, and physical abuse, serve as a powerful reminder of the dehumanizing effects of political extremism. In the years since her death, there has been a growing recognition of the true cost of her execution, not just for the monarchy, but for the values of the revolution itself. Marie Antoinette's death was not the culmination of a noble struggle for liberty. It was a tragic event that revealed the darker side of revolutionary justice. The desire for vengeance overshadowed the revolutionaries' original goals, leading them to inflict harm on an individual who, though part of the old regime, did not deserve the cruelty she endured. As we look back on her story, we are reminded that no matter how powerful or privileged a person may appear to be, they are still vulnerable to the forces of history. Marie Antoinette's life was shaped by the political realities of her time, and she was ultimately consumed by the same forces that had once exalted her. Her life and death serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the dehumanization that can occur when individuals are reduced to symbols or scapegoats. Despite the suffering she endured, Marie Antoinette's legacy is not solely defined by her role in the monarchy. It is defined by her resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship. Even when the world sought to strip her of everything, her title, her dignity, her family, she held onto her humanity. Her strength, grace, and courage in the face of death serve as a powerful reminder that, even in the most dire of circumstances, the human spirit can endure. The cultural re-examination of Marie Antoinette in modern times reveals how history is often shaped by the narratives we choose to tell. For centuries she was seen as a villain, the epitome of everything wrong with the monarchy. But today, as we reflect on the complexity of her life and death, We see her not just as a symbol of excess, but as a woman who was caught in the crossfire of political change. Her suffering was real, her pain undeniable, and her humanity undeniable. Her story challenges us to think critically about the way we remember history and the people who shaped it. Ultimately, Marie Antoinette's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. It serves as a reminder that, no matter how much we may be torn apart by the forces around us, there is always a part of us that remains unbroken. Her story is one of tragedy, but it is also one of triumph for the human soul in the face of overwhelming adversity. The lasting impact of Marie Antoinette's legacy stretches beyond the walls of history books. Her life and death have become symbolic of the ways in which individuals, especially women, have been shaped and distorted by the power dynamics of their time. In her case, the political forces that sought to strip her of her power also stripped her of her personal narrative, turning her into a villain. However, the deeper we dig into her story, the more we uncover the layers of complexity that reveal a woman who was, in many ways, a victim of the political system she was born into. Marie Antoinette's treatment in the years leading up to her execution demonstrates for revolutionaries, even those who claim to fight for freedom, can fall prey to the same forms of tyranny they seek to destroy. Her experience, marked by emotional and psychological manipulation, shows how the cruelty of revolution can often exceed the cruelty of the regime it replaces. The revolutionaries, in their zeal to break down the monarchy, failed to see that their actions against Marie Antoinette were not just about dismantling an institution, they were about destroying a human being. This time has passed, historians and scholars have come to see Marie Antoinette not just as a symbol of royal excess, but as a tragic figure whose life was shaped by circumstances beyond her control. Her life story, once told through the lens of Monterey Strage, is now understood as one of personal loss, grief, and enduring strength. The revolutionaries sought to strip her of her title, her family, and her dignity, but they could not take away the core of who she was: a mother who loved her children, a woman who faced death with grace, and a human being whose suffering transcended the political forces that sought to destroy her. Her story is a reminder of the fragility of human life in the face of power and revolution. Marie Antoinette's death marked the end of a monarchy, but it also marked the beginning of a deeper understanding of how revolutions can fail to deliver on their promises of justice and equality. The very forces that sought to dismantle the old regime often replaced one form of oppression with another. The revolutionaries, in their fervor, forgot that true justice requires compassion and empathy, qualities that were sorely lacking in their treatment of Marie Antoinette. But perhaps the most enduring lesson of her story is that the human spirit can endure, even in the most dehumanizing circumstances. Marie Antoinette's final moments, her courage and grace in the face of death, speak to the resilience of the human soul. She did not collapse under the weight of her suffering. Instead, she maintained her dignity, even as the world around her crumbled. Her legacy is not defined by the fall of the monarchy, but by the strength of character she displayed when faced with the ultimate test. In the end, Marie Antoinette's life is a story of survival. It is a story about the human capacity to endure, to rise above the forces that seek to break us, and to hold on to our humanity, even when everything else is taken from us. Her story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit, and it is one that continues to resonate with us today, reminding us of the power of resilience and the importance of empathy in the face of power. Marie Antoinette's legacy is not just about the fall of a queen or the collapse of a regime. It is about the enduring power of the human soul, the ability to resist dehumanization, and the strength it takes to maintain one's identity and dignity, even in the most harrowing of circumstances. As we look back on her life, we are reminded of the importance of compassion in times of political and social upheaval. Her story challenges us to think critically about the ways in which power is wielded, and the consequences of forgetting the humanity of those we seek to change. Her legacy, once tarnished by the revolution's propaganda, is now a story of resilience and defiance, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of grace, dignity, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The transformation of Marie Antoinette's legacy over time is a powerful example of how history is shaped by the prevailing forces of each era. Her story, which was once marred by accusations of excess and selfishness, has gradually evolved into one of tragedy and resilience. This shift in perception offers an important lesson about how societies reframe the past to fit contemporary narratives and ideals. In her final days, Marie Antoinette's actions were often a direct response to the political forces surrounding her. While she was initially seen as a symbol of the monarchy's decadence, the revolutionaries' brutal treatment of her and her eventual execution revealed the darker side of the revolution. The desire to create a just society led to the demonization and dehumanization of those who represented the old order. In the case of Marie Antoinette, she became a scapegoat for the revolution's frustrations, despite being in many ways a victim of circumstance. Her legacy challenges us to think about the power dynamics that shape our understanding of history. When we look at her life through the lens of political struggle, it becomes clear that Marie Antoinette was more than just a queen. She was a woman who, like many others in history, was caught in the crossfire of forces beyond her control. Her story is a testament to the ways in which personal tragedy can be used as political leverage, and how the victims of history are often forgotten or reduced to mere symbols. What makes Marie Antoinette's story so compelling is not just the politics of the time, but her response to the challenges she faced. Despite the immense personal suffering she endured losing her crown, her family, and her dignity, she never gave up on her humanity. In the face of profound loss and isolation, she clung to her role as a mother and a woman of grace. Her final moments were marked by an apology to the executioner, a gesture that highlighted the humanity she refused to lose, even in the face of death. Her resilience stands as a powerful reminder that the forces that shape history often overlook the humanity of those they seek to destroy. Marie Antoinette's execution was not just the end of a monarchy, it was the destruction of a person. Her story is a reflection of the ways in which individuals become casualties of political systems, and how the cruelty of revolution can sometimes exceed that of the systems it seeks to replace. While the political forces of the revolution sought to strip Marie Antoinette of her identity, her legacy has proven resilient. Over the centuries, she's been reinterpreted, her image reshaped to reflect the deeper complexities of her life and death. In the modern era, historians have come to see her not just as a symbol of royal excess, but as a woman whose suffering deserves recognition. Her story, though tragic, offers important lessons about power, empathy, and the costs of political extremism. Through the lens of history, we can now see that Marie Antoinette's fate was sealed not just by the monarchy's downfall, but by the political forces that sought to dehumanize her. Her story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of reducing individuals to symbols, and the importance of maintaining compassion even in the face of revolution. As we look back on her life today, we see a woman who, despite everything, managed to retain her dignity and humanity. Her final words, though not heard by her family, remain a testament to her love and devotion as a mother. Even in death, Marie Antoinette's humanity transcended the political forces that tried to erase her. In the broader context of history, Marie Antoinette's legacy serves as a reminder that the fight for justice must always be tempered with empathy. While the revolution sought to bring equality to France, it often did so at the cost of compassion. Her story challenges us to consider how far we are willing to go in the pursuit of political goals, and whether we can retain our humanity in the process.